Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Michael Gilkes' play Couvade. So Couvade is a ritual performed by some indigenous, particularly Caribbean groups, in which during a pregnancy, a father will put himself into physical danger or undergo some sort of physical stress in order to sort of create a spiritual connection with the unborn child. So in the note on the ritual of Couvade by Michael Gilkes, what he says here is, in fact, a Couvade is an extremely widespread ritual among so-called primitive races. He's taking that from a definition from the Penguin English Dictionary. Like the Carib Indians, where the father of the newborn child confines himself to his hammock and must observe certain rules and taboos aimed at ensuring the child's health and happiness in the future. The civilized equivalent of a couvade would seem to be the traditional chain-smoking or excessive drinking of the nervous father-to-be and the self-congratulatory offering of cigars if the child is a boy. The primitive version, however, usually entails personal hardship voluntarily undertaken by the father. Among certain river-dwelling tribes, the custom, it is said, is to tie the father-to-be to a tree trunk below the high water mark during the final stages of his wife's labor. If the birth is delayed, his own life becomes, symbolically if not actually, forfeit to the rising water. The father thus establishes a vital link with the unborn child. So, Couvade, the play, is a multifaceted, almost multi-genre performative piece. It centers really around Lionel and Pat. So Lionel is a teacher and an artist, and Pat is his pregnant wife, who's very close to giving birth. The parts of this play that are a linear, sort of naturalistic element of the play deal with their relationship as Lionel becomes more and more sort of devoted, fanatically devoted to completing his paintings, inspired by the term that Gilkes uses is Amerindian myths, but indigenous mythology, the indigenous mythology of Guyana, where Gilkes is from, and Lionel's own dreams that become increasingly chaotic and increasingly feel like reality to him. He is sacrificing his health. He's not eating. He's drinking too much. His eyes are deteriorating. And so what we get with this is a kind of Couvade ritual that he puts himself through. In scene 10 of part 3, Pat confronts Lionel about this. She's been, throughout the play, concerned about his health, concerned about his deterioration, etc., etc. And she confronts him about this, and he attempts to explain this sort of manic need that he has to complete the paintings for this exhibition. And he doesn't directly put it in the terminology of Couvade, but that seems to be what he's doing here. So she says to him, because he hasn't come up to eat, she says, well, if Muhammad won't come to the mountain will have to come to him. Lai, this painting is so important that you have to stop eating even? He's taken up the plate and is toying with the food. Lionel says, I just don't feel hungry, that's all. Too much on my mind. Too much to do, Pat. He prongs a piece of meat on the word do, action suggesting frustration. She looks at the robe painting. So the robe painting is one that he's painted earlier, which is a set of depictions of basically mixed ancestors, because, and this is going to become an important point in just a minute when I talk about this. Guyana, like many Caribbean countries, has a wide range of has people of a wide range of different ancestries. In Guyana, it seems to primarily be African and Indian, and then indigenous as the sort of third group, with healthy minorities of Chinese and other people. And so he has, a lot of his paintings seem to involve depictions of sort of multi-raced group structured within the aesthetic traditions of the indigenous people of Guyana. And so he says, so she says, and you can do what you have to do by starving yourself and by not looking after your health. She indicates the half-empty bottle on table. Rum can't take the place of food, you know. Lionel, between deliberate mouthfuls, says, look, Pat, you don't understand. I can't really explain it, but this exhibition, well, it's... A strange tone creeps into his voice, an earnestness. Something that I have to do, and soon. There isn't time. And so there's a lot more where he's attempting to sort of explain this metaphysical need that he has to complete this set of paintings, and she does not understand. In part because he doesn't explain it all that clearly, in part because it is a metaphysical thing. But what we get here is this sort of self-imposed, self-created ritual of Couvade, in which he is sacrificing his health, or putting at risk his health, during the period where she is going to be giving birth to their new son. And part of what's important about this is that their child is going to be multiracial. Lionel himself is multiracial, and Pat, I think, I don't remember if Pat is multiracial or if she's just of Indian descent. I sneezed and had to blow my nose. Oh, I'm hoping I'm going to remember to edit that out. Anyway, so Lionel is multiracial. Pat, I don't remember. I think she's Indian, but she may be multiracial as well. Yeah, she's a mixed race. So Lionel, at one point at the end of part one, reminds her, which is really more for the audience's benefit, that he's part African and part Amerindian. And she says, and your grandmother was a Portuguese from Madeira, and your maternal great-grandfather was an Indian from India. You know, sometimes I believe you made up the whole family tree you always talking about. But this is an important thing, because this is one of the central ideological concerns of Gilkes's play, is the composition of Guyana. And this is associated with these issues of post-colonial identity. And there are a number of debates between Lionel and his friend Arthur, who's politically minded, about basically about post-colonialism and the nature of Guyanese society. Arthur is very much, he has this sort of notion, this kind of back to Africa notion, in which, because the majority of people in Guyana are of African descent, that should be the primary national identification. And Lionel disagrees. He very much takes the position that this should be a melting pot, a cultural blending of the various cultures, backgrounds, traditions, etc. of the people of Guyana. This is an interesting post-colonial question, and it actually highlights something very distinctive about the Caribbean in the context of post-colonial theory, right? Because with a lot of liberated nations, former colonies, the big question becomes, do we try to return to a pre-colonial culture, or do we try and move forward with a hybrid culture, or do we seek some alternative, right? So you think about a place like Ireland, right? When Ireland is liberated from the British in the 20s, the 1920s, one question becomes, do we try and reconstruct Celtic Irish culture with the Celtic language, with Celtic artistic styles, cultural expression, etc., etc.? And there's enough Irish people, the population of Ireland remains largely Irish, that you could theoretically do that. That was the premise of the Celtic revival, which began sort of in the 1880s, where people tried to return to pre-contact, pre-colonial Irish culture. This is complicated. You think about places like Nigeria, for instance, which is not a traditional national entity. It was created really at the Conference of Berlin in 1888 by European colonialists. And a country like Nigeria has really three major ethnic groups: the Yoruba, the Hausa, and the Igbo, and then a number of smaller ethnic groups. What should the national culture of Nigeria look like? I mean, the Yoruba and Hausa and Igbo all have different cultures, different traditions, different languages, different ways of looking at the world. What should a Nigerian national culture look like? If you were trying to go back to a pre-colonial culture, which one would you choose and why? So you run into those kinds of issues. But in the Caribbean, it's quite different, right? Like, in virtually throughout the Caribbean, there just simply aren't enough indigenous people left through direct violence, through genocide, through the spread of disease, etc., etc. There generally just aren't enough indigenous people left to reconstruct Carib culture or Taino culture or whatever it is. But at the same time, you have large groups of people who either have come by choice, the British, French, Spanish, Dutch colonizers, or who have been brought there as slaves from Africa or as laborers from India, from China, from wherever it is, Southeast Asia. How do you determine the culture of a place like that? Like, you can't really recreate, you can't return to the indigenous culture of Guyana when very, very few of the people in the country are of that indigenous culture, right? And so this becomes an increasingly difficult problem for many post-colonial societies, particularly in places like the Caribbean. And so one of the things that Gilkes is trying to work through with this play is, how does Guyana move forward in developing a national culture, right? Can the country, can the people sort of limit themselves to, I am of African descent and therefore West African culture is going to be my culture, whatever it is? Or does this have to be a more complex interplay and negotiation of cultures? And if so, what does and can that look like? right? So those are big challenges. And what's happening in this play is that Lionel is going through this Couvade ritual, not only for his child, who's soon to be born, but seemingly for Guyana itself, right? For the nation that is emerging and starting to negotiate what its identity will be. So that's the more literal side of the play. There's also a lot of dream sequences, ritual sequences. We open with an invocation from an indigenous shaman. We have throughout the play scenes where we have an Ashanti priest come and perform rituals, dream sequence rituals. We have an Indian priest at some point, and we have this indigenous shaman return. And these three figures are involved in the closing as well. So the play opens with this invocation and it closes with I don't know if invocation is exactly the right term, because I think that tends to be an opening ritual, but it opens with this opening ritual and it closes with a closing ritual to sort of signify the entrance and exit from this space of transformation, right? And it's not just Lionel's transformation. It's not just the baby's transition from the prenatal period to being born, but it is Guyana's transition from the colonial period to a new period of liberation and self-definition, whatever that self-definition ends up looking like.